In this lecture, we're going to be talking about learning abilities, how to enhance them, and how to improve them. As we were talking about neuroplasticity, it is very obvious, and by now I'm pretty sure that all of you know, that learning is one of the biggest parts of neuroplasticity. One of the things that influence our brain's plasticity the most is the learning strategies that we go through. And learning strategies is a really big word. We can be talking about things we're actually learning, or we can be talking about learning mechanisms. Some people learn faster when they hear stuff. Some people learn faster when they see stuff. Some people are good with math. Some people are not. Some people are good with art. Some people are not. The next time you go to a classroom, the next time you're sitting in a place where somebody's giving some information and there's a group of people who are learning stuff, you can be sure that at the exact same moment, their brain is physically growing and changing, physically and chemically. There's one particular trait to neuroplasticity when it comes to learning, is that it is selective. When somebody says something, it's up to you to decide if what they said is true or what they said is not true. And if what they said is true and you're convinced and you liked it and you want to apply it, then neuroplasticity is going to be very effective in that case. But even when you think that it's false and you refuse to believe it, you're also going through the concept of neuroplasticity. There are neural structures forming that will tell you eventually that this concept is false for you, of course, according to your own personal opinion. And in learning, you can actually see neuroplasticity happening. And the way you can do it is just try the following. Get a small paragraph or poem and try to memorize it. Memorize it once, memorize it twice. Keep on reading it again and again and again. And every time you read it, try to say it. Try to see how much you would remember of this poem. And you will notice, of course, out of common sense, that when you repeat it 20 times, you're going to be able to recall way more than you were able to recall after repeating it 5 times. You can even take it up a notch. Get 2 poems, read one for 5 times, and then see how much you would recall out of it, and record it or write it down. And then take another poem, the exact same, if you want length of poem, it has to be 3, 4, 5 lines, not more than that. Read it 20 times and see how much you recall out of this poem. Now, after 2 days, sit down again and see how much you would remember from each and every poem. And you will obviously remember the second poem way more than the first one. And the reason why is because it is wired in your brain. Neurons that fire together, wire together, and this is exactly what happened with you. As you were repeating the information over and over again, there's been a neural structure, a neural network that was formed inside your brain because cells that fire together, wire together. All of these cells and neurons that were firing together as you were repeating the poem over and over again got wired together. And of course, we know in neuroplasticity that the consistency would increase this connection between neural structures. So practice eventually can even make it permanent. There are some things that you will never forget in your life because you practiced it so many times. The more times the network is stimulated, the stronger and more efficient it becomes. Repeating an activity, retrieving a memory, reviewing all of this material in a variety of ways can help you build your memory, can help you build this neural structure between all the different neurons and neural structures involved in this learning process. So a very easy way to understand learning process and neuroplasticity is to look at it as weightlifting. Weightlifting and physical exercise can build your muscle. When you're learning, the nerve cells in your brain are growing with all these mental exercising that you're doing, with all the learning that you're receiving. These neurons are developing through connections and through links for neural structures and single neurons itself that are linking together for the first time. Now, we know that neurons will process and transmit information through electrical and chemical signals throughout the entire brain, and there are billions of neurons in the human brain. And all these new thoughts and new skills and new things that you're learning will crave out new pathways inside your brain. Now, through repetition and practice, these pathways will become stronger and stronger. And on the other hand, the old pathways will get weaker and weaker until they disappear. Which brings us to the misconceptions that people have around the idea of learning and neuroplasticity. And the first misconception is your intelligence and brain capacity is limited. In fact, through studies and research, it was found that neuroplasticity will give you the ability to become more intelligent, will increase your brain capacity, and therefore your intelligence and brain capacity are not limited. A person's IQ can increase or decrease throughout time because of course, things he's learning, he or she's learning, experiencing through memories and through a lot of different daily experiences. Even stimulants can affect that a lot. A lot of people who use stimulants for ADHD, for example, are found to have higher IQs after years of using this medication because of course, the process of neuroplasticity. And people who smoke weed, for example, were found that their IQ between the ages of 18 to 35, their IQ would decrease by 6 points on average. And all of this is happening because of neuroplasticity. And the second misconception is that a lot of people think that, for example, they're not good at math, they're not good at writing something. Some people feel like they cannot handle numbers at all. Some people feel like they cannot write essays, it's just not their thing. And they become accustomed to that, and people grow up becoming engineers or English literature students. And every single time they talk to someone, they just say, I can't do this or I can't do that. My mind doesn't function here, my mind doesn't function there. In fact, the fact that they are saying this is the reason why they are where they are. They are the reason why their brain is wired in a certain way, why their brain is wired in this particular way. People who are not good at math are not good at math because their brain was wired accordingly. If at a young age they kept practicing math over and over again and they grew up liking math and thinking that they're really good at it, even if they weren't, even if at a young age you weren't good at math, but you kept thinking that you're good or you're getting better and that you like math, you would have improved a lot, and by now you would have thought to yourself that you're good at math. But as math is not a very easy subject, most people during school, when they're young, they get bad grades. And of course, bad grades equals bad emotions. And when people experience these unpleasant and uncomfortable emotions or state, they want to get away from it. They want to move away from it. And therefore, they move away from math. But as math is something that you can't avoid, and you're going to keep seeing it throughout your entire schooling until you graduate and you go to university and then you decide what you want to do, people keep struggling and they keep hating it more and more, and they barely pass the class until they get to university and they just want to move away from math. They want nothing to do with math. Of course, there are some people who are born with this unique ability to be able to solve these problems more easily. They were born with a logical side of their brain that is way more improved than others, and it's all related to their genes. There was a mutation that happened that made it possible for them to solve these equations and these problems in a different way than others would solve them. And therefore, you can improve all the learning mechanisms in your brain, whether it's math, whether it's writing, whether it's your ability to memorize stuff. You can develop any learning mechanism you want through neuroplasticity. And we're going to talk about it a bit more later on how to use neuroplasticity to develop all the learning mechanisms that you want. But this brings us to the last misconception. People grow up with a certain ideology. They grow up with parents who always say to them, you are really good at art. You're really good at drawing, you're really good at this, you're really good at that. Ever since you were young, you were so good with the computer, you knew how to use it really, really well. And these people grew up thinking that they are prodigies when it comes to computers. They continue learning more in university about computers, and then they get to the actual world, the real world, where they have to actually work with computers. And that's when they realize that they absolutely hate it. I have a friend who spent 5 years at university until he finished his master's in computer science to realize that he hates computers. He hates sitting down in front of a computer and doing stuff. He's more of an artistic person who likes to go to parks, be out in a park and draw and do videography and photography. And in a second, his entire self-image was shattered. He grew up his entire life thinking that computer is the way and he's going to be a software developer, he's going to do computer science and work on computers for the rest of his life, and then only to realize that he actually hates it. And don't get me wrong, he was good with computers. He was top of his class and he was doing really well. He was performing really, really well. But the only reason he did it is because he was good at it. Not because he liked it, not because he loved it, just because he was good at it. We, as humans, we have a tendency to always do stuff we're good at. Stuff where we feel comfortable, stuff where we feel like we have a certain competitive edge over other people. If you are good at basketball, you're probably going to play it more and more and more for a simple reason, which is the human's ego. When somebody's good at something and they can show off, they're going to do it more and more. They're going to keep repeating. And when they're not good at something and they're not getting any better, they want to move away from it. Hence the math example we gave before. But this is a good example. My friend grew up thinking that he's good with computers and he became good with computers. The only issue was that he did not really like what he was doing. And the misconception is that someone's opinion of you does not have to become your reality. In this particular example, we can talk about a very negative situation where one of my favorite public speakers, Leslie Brown, he talked about an example where he was identified as mentally retarded in school and he was put back from one class to another because of that. And because of this opinion, he worked accordingly. He became slower, he became less intelligent, and he thought that this is his reality. Until one day he met a teacher, his name was Leroy Washington, if I'm not mistaken, and he wanted him to go on the board and write something, but he said, I can't because I'm mentally retarded. And the teacher said, someone's opinion of you does not have to become your reality. And Les Brown emphasized this idea on how a certain person's opinion can become another person's reality. When somebody gives their opinion about you, you have a tendency to take their opinion as something very, very important, where in fact you shouldn't. The only opinion that should really matter to you is your own personal opinion. There are exceptions, of course, but at the end of the day, you need to keep in mind that your brain is being wired through all the learning that you're getting. And when we say learning, we say hearing. And when we say hearing, we say opinions. When you hear people's opinions and you believe them, you are learning something new. You are learning something new about yourself that came through other people. And once you start believing it and you start reinforcing this idea inside your mind over and over and over again, it's going to become wired. Neuroplasticity is not going to work with you, it's going to work against you. Now, something that you also need to know is that learning is not just the process of hearing new information and saying that this is true or this is false and wiring it inside your brain. One of the biggest factors that is involved in learning is emotions. Emotions is the system that tells you how important something is. Attention focuses us on the important and away from the unimportant things. Cognition tells us what to do about it, and cognitive skills are whatever it takes to do these things. All of this combination works towards neuroplasticity, of course. When your professor in class said, pay attention because what I'm about to say is going to be in your final, you dropped everything and you were focused right away, and whatever he said, you made sure to write it down and review it over and over again. Why? Because it's linked to an emotional state. When the professor said this is gonna be in the final, whatever your brain thought about is final equals grades equals good grades equals whatever you want to get to. And that made the moment emotionally charged. And that's why you remembered what the professor said when he was talking about something that's going to show up in the exams, but you don't remember the other 3 hours that he was talking. And learning goes hand in hand with memory. There are 3 lectures about memory that you need to go through and really understand them before being able to understand learning. They are complementary. If you have good memory, you have good memory skills, and you know how memory and neuroplasticity work, and then you know how learning and neuroplasticity work. By linking both concepts together, you can see a huge improvement. Because at the end of the day, learning and memories are related. When you learn something, if you want to apply it, you need to remember it. But now, because emotions are linked to learning, when you experience certain emotions like stress and anger, you will perform more poorly. If you are ever in a lecture, or you're ever listening to your boss talking, or if you're ever in a job interview, doing whatever, learning something, and you're stressed, or you're angry, or you're sad, the learning mechanisms are not going to be as good. These emotions will make you lose focus. You'll not be able to concentrate well. You will not be able to really memorize and recall the information that you're getting. You're not going to be able to actually differentiate between what you actually need to store in your brain and what you don't have to, what's important and what's not, because all what you can think about is this one thing that's making you stressed out or angry. And that's exactly why in other lectures we said that if you ever have a problem that's making you stressed, do not continue learning or doing what you're doing before solving the problem. Stop, solve the problem, and then go back to whatever you were doing. This is the best way to do it. Otherwise, you will be losing your time and getting yourself into an even worse emotional state because you're putting more pressure on yourself. You're saying to yourself, I need to focus, I need to learn, I need to finish, when in fact your brain cannot focus because of the release of stress hormones. I know there are a lot of motivational speakers that would go against that and say, no, whatever is happening, you need to focus, but you can oppose psychology. A lot of people did, but you cannot oppose biology. Stress hormones will disrupt and there will be a lot of disturbance in your mental state. This will affect you in a negative way. This will affect your cognitive states in a negative way. And therefore, solving the problem and moving the stress away would be way better and more beneficial for your cognitive state. And lastly, one more thing that you need to keep in mind that can also be detrimental for the cognitive and learning process when it comes to neuroplasticity is uncertainty. When you learn something new and you didn't really understand it well, you might understand it in a way, and then the next day you would think about it and then understand it in another way, and then you become confused between 2 or 3 or 4 different analyses that you made in your mind. What this will do is that it won't let any neural structure, neural network, or neural link get formed that is strong enough for this information to be wired in your brain. And what's going to happen is every single time you think about another situation or another analysis of the situation, there's another neural structure forming, more neural links forming together. And therefore, the other links that you formed before are getting weaker. So when you learn something and you're not sure if it's right or wrong, you're not sure what the right answer is, make sure to do whatever you can to know the right answer in order for you to learn it effectively and to learn exactly what the answer is. Remove the uncertainty, be certain about the answer, follow it, and let it get wired in your brain.